Good morning, and welcome to the Tennessee Principal Professional Learning Series. My name is Jim McIntyre, and I serve as the Director of the Center for Educational Leadership at the University of Tennessee. And as many of you know, during the current public health crisis, the University of Tennessee has developed this program of 11 professional learning modules to provide research, information, and a chance for some professional dialogue around several of the key leadership challenges that principals in the volunteer state are facing right now. Today's session is part of module number 8 of the Tennessee Principal Professional Learning Series on supporting educators in the age of COVID. And this session is organized around 2 recorded video presentations that provide insights on supporting educators through understanding and addressing teacher stress and creating hope in our schools. In addition to the presentation, you'll have the chance for some small group discussion among your peers. You can access all the resources for this session at our Center for Educational Leadership website that's shown on the current slide. There'll be a survey link that I post toward the end of the session, and please be sure to fill it out as we want your feedback. And this is how we'll know that you're here and how the Tennessee Department of Education will know to award you tassel credit. Before we begin, I want to make sure to thank Commissioner Schwinn and the Tennessee Department of Education for making this opportunity available to public school principals in Tennessee. And I also want to recognize the contributions of our content experts and the support of our philanthropic partners, including the American Institutes for Research, the Gallup Organization, and Tennessee SCORE. We're delighted to have Matthew Clifford from the American Institutes for Research and Jerlene Mosley from the Gallup Organization as our expert presenters today. We'll begin with a roughly 30-minute video presentation by Dr. Clifford that will examine educator stress and what school leaders can do about it. We'll then have some time for small group conversation among your peers. So we'll start straight away with the presentation from Dr. Matthew Clifford at the American Institutes for Research.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today called Supporting Educators in the Age of COVID. You know that as principals and assistant principals, the 2019-20 and 2021 academic years have been challenging to you, your students, communities, and teachers. And we appreciate that you're taking the time to meet with us and your colleagues today. Today, we'll talk about the ways that school leaders might support teachers and other educators with specific emphasis on feelings of distress and social and emotional support. Throughout the session, I'll provide some ideas and some research, some tools that have been produced by my organization, the American Institutes for Research, and other organizations that are interested in these topics and this research. Let's start off by taking just a moment to do an internal check. Now, let's take a look at the quadrants on the screen. What I'm asking you to do is think about the quadrants that you see, A, B, C, and D, here. And where would you place yourself in the quadrant at this moment? You may be somewhat of a centrist in your ratings today, and that's great, that's fine. Jim is going to put up a quick poll for us so that as a group, I'd like you to choose either quadrant A, B, C, or D. So choose the quadrant that best represents where you are in the moment. Whatever your feelings, we're glad that you've chosen to join us today, and we're hopeful that we can provide some good information and conversation to support your work as school administrators, with teachers, and with students. Jim should take the time now to share the results of the poll so that we as a group can see where we are together. So how are we? Are we in quadrant A, frustrated and anxious? Quadrant D, satisfied, pleasant, and calm? Is this something that you would be willing to put forward to your teachers at the start of a faculty meeting that might be on Zoom? It may be a way to just kind of temperature check and have a conversation about where you as a school are. For this session today, I want to share some research about where we are with the national pandemic and specifically how we can support teachers. With any kind of Zoom conversation, I think that we can provide some research and information, but it would be your responsibility to follow up on what interests you and what you can use in your schools. My goal is to provide a little bit of research, but then there's a lot of links at the end of this document of the presentation that I hope you'll follow up on with us. And please reach out to me if you're interested in more information. So let's take a look at the current state of education. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about what we know about supporting teachers as they have experienced stress and other emotions associated with the dramatic changes prompted by the national pandemic and our response to it. We've come to accept the phrase that these are unprecedented times, and that is certainly true. And our situation has brought additional uncertainties and risks that can kind of raise the stress level of teachers, community members, and students alike. Each of our experiences may differ, but nationally and internationally, the pandemic has dramatically and quickly changed education as we have known it for decades. Survey research of 2,150 school districts by AIR and research on the state of education by the World Bank documents the scope of this change. I've summarized some of the facts here on screen. While the statistics tell us where we are now and where we've been, the changes that are indicated here on screen raises questions about the relative permanence of our current situation. Which aspects of education will be indelible? Which will be beneficial? And how are we going to respond as educational leaders to make the most out of our current situation? Which aspects of education as we know it will be lost or set aside? So what we know is that 85% of the schools have closed at some point during the pandemic worldwide. We know from school superintendents' responses to AIR's survey that online learning is now the primary instructional modality for students. And that learning is occurring primarily online, either synchronously or asynchronously. And we also know that we have a long way to go to ensure that online learning is equitable and that all kids have access to it. Because what we've seen is that students with disadvantages experience heightened barriers to engaging fully in online learning, either because they lack the equipment to engage or because of the way that they need to learn, online learning isn't fully for them. And that's a real challenge that in the coming academic year, we have to face. As educators, we've responded quickly to the remarkable social and economic changes that have occurred. And while we've been focused on service to students, families, and communities, we've also experienced stress and anxiety. That stress and anxiety may not be readily on the surface and observable, but it's certainly there. As educators, we tend to be focused on the development and well-being of our students first, and that's what has drawn us to the profession. And sometimes our own feelings have taken a back seat. But those feelings can naturally affect the way that we go about our work and our lives. So recent data on the teacher workforce suggests that the pandemic and circumstances surrounding the pandemic have influenced teachers. Several organizations and research teams have been documenting the changes in the teacher workforce. Teachers are experiencing clearly more stress. Teachers are opting to leave the profession because they're experiencing additional stress, concern for their family, and there are differences between state and district policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in Tennessee and other states, you may see variation with respect to the amount of stress that teachers are experiencing. Some research with smaller samples indicates that teachers' sense of well-being has decreased. They feel insecure about their work environment. They feel insecure and uncertain about what the future holds. Teachers also have reported that they feel underprepared to deliver online learning. And that's natural because we've made a quick shift to online learning, and teachers oftentimes are not trained in preparation programs to design online learning or conduct it. We're also working with new technology and new supports for students, or we're repurposing technology to engage with students in new ways. And lastly, more teachers than ever before are considering leaving the profession. Some survey data from NEA indicates that 28% of teachers said that they are more likely to retire, which is about 8% higher than the national average. As principals, you may also have similar feelings. In fact, forthcoming research by Learning Policy Institute, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and the National Association of Secondary School Principals suggests that principals and assistant principals like yourselves and other administrators are considering leaving the profession, are experiencing higher levels of stress than ever before. So what can we do with that stress? What can we do as administrators to support teachers, the whole teacher, not just professionally, but also in other aspects of their work? I think one of the things that we can do, and one of the things that I've worked with principals to do, is to think about teachers as the whole person, as a whole professional who are moving through schools and need our support. So one thing to think about are the origins of stress, and what can we as school administrators do to support teachers through stress and stressful situations. I know that this is a very different time. We're not having ongoing meetings, and we're not in touch with teachers in the same way that we have been in the past. But some knowledge about stress and how people handle stress may allow us to regulate stress for ourselves and put systems in place for teachers as well. So as I'm thinking about stress, and as others have been thinking about it as well, like the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine, they think about teacher stress as having four types. First, there's the self and educator health. And so how are we doing physically, emotionally, and what changes are occurring for us? Teachers also feel stress about students. So students' well-being and their progress. And then there is family and community well-being, either our immediate family and community or the families of students and community members at large. And then lastly, there's our professional context as a source of stress. And if you think about these four areas, I think it's remarkable how many changes have occurred in the past several months that fit into this typology. I can think of very few aspects of these sources of stressors, these origins of stress, that haven't been heightened for teachers. And I think that has a cumulative effect on us as a profession and probably on your school staff as well. Another way to think about stress around the research. So what we've noticed from surveys conducted by American Institutes for Research and the NEA is that these sources of stress, these origins of stress, are evident in that research. There's many sources of stress, of course, but the top 7 I'm bringing to you with this slide. First of all, teachers are highly concerned for their kids and students' families. Teachers are also concerned about feeling socially isolated from colleagues, and their network of support has been diminished through the lack of interaction. Teachers have said that they are anxious about student learning and the ability to provide services to students. There's been a change in their professional mission as it's expanded beyond just the academics to include social and emotional support, and also outreach to communities during changes in their economic status, providing oftentimes food and other supports to families who are going through hard times. There's been a remarkable change in work routines, and then there's been the need to rapidly learn and apply new skills to online learning for kids. And then lastly, teachers and other educators have said that there's a good deal of uncertainty about the future, particularly as we may have to pivot between current online learning and whatever happens next with the pandemic, as hotspots may come up or dissipate over time. As principals, we often think about and take action on ensuring schools are well managed and instruction is top notch. With so many students in our schools, there's a lot to pay attention to, even under normal circumstances. But understanding the whole teacher, I think, and the stressors that teachers are feeling may be a positive step in supporting teachers and ultimately the school. So that's why I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the types of stress that people may be experiencing. So first of all, it's important to understand that we all experience stress, and stress is a natural part of our lives. But there's 2 types of stress. One is called eustress, which is actually a positive. It's a positive stress or some form of pressure to perform. This is the type of stress that gets us up in the morning, pushes us to try harder in our profession, to improve services to students. And we handle that stress through our action. Then the other type of stress is distress, or negative stress, something that is experienced that causes us to change in a way that we may not be able to handle. So that's stress that's unwanted or it's counterproductive. Psychologists think about 3 types of distress that people are experiencing. One is called acute distress, which is an event or experience that is short-lived and may produce some form of trauma. And there's a scale on this, of course. There's one type of distress that you may experience when when something doesn't go your way, and you can work through that. But then there's another type of stress or distress that you're experiencing that may be a life-altering event, and that's a traumatic experience, and that's one that needs to be understood and worked through in order to better function. A second type of chronic stress, a second type of stress is called chronic stress. These are events or experiences that occur repeatedly over longer periods of time. I think about chronic stress as sort of like a bad back. We experience the pain and we can get used to that bad back, that pain, but it dulls what we're able to do over time. And it affects the way that we go about our daily experiences. And then finally, there's historic distress. And historic distress is the cumulative impact of group trauma that occurs over longer periods of time. That may affect generation to generation, families across longer periods of time as the distress isn't processed, but people experience that stress time and time again. What types of distress are teachers experiencing? What types of distress are you currently experiencing? Another way to think about stress is how you experience it. On the one hand, there's primary traumatic stress, which is your firsthand experiences. You may go through a family change. You may have a health crisis yourself, or your teachers may as well. That's a firsthand traumatic stress. And then, of course, there's secondary traumatic stress, and that's something that I think nationally many of us are experiencing. That is hearing about and empathizing with someone who has experienced stress firsthand. And certainly, as we're working with our communities and students, we have that secondary distress experience. It's important, I think, to understand that that distress and trauma, those feelings of intensity, aren't necessarily associated with your experience as you go through it. In fact, two people may experience the same occurrence, but the response may be more or less intense based upon multiple different factors in your personal history, your ability to process, your capacity to handle stress, your sense of resilience, and the care that you take for your own mental and physical health. So a person may go through different types of stress, may be experiencing different stress, but it's important to note that, of course, we all respond to stress very differently. Responses to stress come up in different ways, and I think about behavior as really the tip of the iceberg. So it may be that a person experiences a good deal of stress, but in the moment that you're speaking with them, they may or may not have behaviors that would indicate that they're under stress. So as administrators, it's important for us to stay in touch with teachers and make sure that we're continually checking in with them and checking about their stress levels and noticing behaviors and being open, I think, to conversations about stress. So two behavioral responses to stress come about. One is called hyperarousal, which is closer to the +5 on the energy scale that I introduced at the start. This may come out in a renewed irritability, anger, overreactions to smaller issues. We may get into habits that are counterproductive and unhealthy, such as panic buying, acting childish, blaming others. We may be using substances that are like alcohol that are counterproductive to what we're doing. A second response is called hypoarousal, which is at the lower end of the energy scale, of course. So that may include sleeping a lot, procrastinating, ruminating on things, not being unable to get ideas to process through your mind, not exercising, acting confused, being flat emotionally. All of these things are indicators of how hypoarousal. And it's important to notice those things and, and talk to teachers about them, about what you're noticing, or get in touch with some professionals that can help teachers out. One tool to help teachers, I think, is just a self-assessment form. So my colleagues at American Institutes for Research have created this form that's on screen. There's a link into the form. So if you're looking for a tool to help educators identify their levels of stress so that they can take care of themselves, we've created an interactive tool that you can log into and just monitor yourself, or ask teachers to do that as well. On the scale, of course, this is a diagnostic tool. So on the scale, we go from low stress to middle stress to high stress. And also it relates to the whole teacher, those categories of stress that I introduced early on in the slides. So lastly, I'd like to, before we transition into a discussion, I'd like to leave you with a few things that you as administrators can do when engaging with others who may be experiencing trauma or stress. And I think Mark Brackett and his colleagues talk about two types of responses when someone comes to us with a stressful situation, two ways that we can engage. And I think the way that we engage with teachers is of utmost importance, because I think we all hope that teachers will come to us as administrators with some of their problems, so that there's a two-way dialogue about stress during this period. So our responses can have a lot to do with whether the door is open to that conversation or whether the door closes. So Mark Brackett and his colleagues talk about two responses. And of the two, I'd encourage you to try to be an emotional scientist. So an emotional scientist enters a conversation with a sense of curiosity and openness, and also empathy for the person who's experiencing stress. The emotional scientist applies that perspective to active listening with others as they're discussing stress. And takes us with that scientific perspective, you and your colleagues can legitimize others' experiences and provide a more kind of natural, open space for expressing those feelings in a trusting way. So what does it mean to be an emotional scientist? One is that an emotional scientist asks teachers and others about their stressors and makes space in the natural flow of professional life for people to speak honestly and openly, either in one-on-one or smaller groups about the stresses that they're experiencing. Secondly, an emotional scientist accepts that emotional responses occur and takes those emotional responses in as information about how someone is responding to stress. They practice emotional intelligence when listening to teachers as they're talking about the stresses that they're feeling. And they pay close attention to teacher behaviors also as information about stress. Importantly, I think the emotional scientist considers stress and emotional states as changing, as something that people are experiencing rather than something that is a part of the person. So in other words, my emotional state may change over time, and that's a part of me, sure, but also I can handle that emotional stress with support, and those states may change. And that's important to, I think, to tell teachers and talk with teachers about, because this is a difficult period and we may be acting very differently than is normal. And that's okay. And that's okay. And then an emotional scientist also knows what to do and can support a teacher as they're going through a difficult time. So that means number 11 on the list here, know about district policies, resources, and benefits available to teachers if they are experiencing stress. Tell teachers about those resources, and if needed, make connections between teachers and mental health professionals so that they get the help that they need. And then on the flip side, there's the emotional judge. The emotional judge asks about stress when the behavior is evident, which signals that you're actually calling out the stress and maybe pushing people to make a change. And that could be problematic. The emotional judge considers emotions to be permanent, a permanent state, and an aspect of someone's life and history. And that's challenging because when considering emotions to be permanent, of course, the person doesn't have the opportunity to move through the state and exhibit other emotions. And then lastly, an emotional judge may view emotions as either good or bad, as opposed to a gradation of gray. And I think makes judgments based on whether the emotion is good or bad. And that causes, I think, emotions to be sort of put aside and set aside in a space within one's mind. And actually that could be problematic because you store those spaces and don't let them out. So that's some of the behaviors that an emotional judge can do. So as we're moving into our discussion section, I encourage us to take a couple of minutes to think about the ideas that I've very briefly introduced here. One is I'd like you to think about and talk about where you are sort of emotionally in your support of teachers, and also how are you distributing responsibility for social and emotional support of teachers within your school building? Who is helping you to engage with teachers and be your eyes and ears as you're working with your staff? So those are two questions that I put forward to you as you're transitioning out. Then lastly, as I mentioned, I would hope that this is an introduction to and an invitation to conversation. Please feel free to get back in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you by emailing me or connecting through to some of the resources at air.org. Thanks for your time today, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay, very good. Our thanks to Dr. Matthew Clifford, who is at American Institutes for Research, for that presentation. We're going to move into a small group conversation now and talk a little bit about that presentation about teacher stress and how to address it. So as you, I will invite you to small group in just a second here. As you arrive in the small group, please do turn on your video and your microphone so we can have a great conversation. We'll have 3 groups, and there will be 2 facilitators actually in each of your group to ask some of the questions that that Matt has offered on his presentation. And we'll have about 10 minutes. So we'll come back here at together into the large group at 9:45. So I will just real quick, here are the questions. Again, I put them in the chat, but just to review them real quick. So one, you're going to talk about just the question he asked: how are you feeling today? What quadrant are you in, and what quadrant do you think your teachers are in of that matrix that Dr. Clifford talked about? How are you working to address educator stress? How are you distributing responsibility within your school so that there are others supporting educators? And how can you ensure that you're, as Dr. Clifford talked about, an emotion scientist rather than an emotion judge? So let's go to small group, and you should get an invitation right now. As you accept the invitation, it will take you to the small group. Okay, welcome back everyone from small group. I know that was very quick, but we'll have another chance in a few minutes to have some small group conversation. I apologize for the abruptness of the transitions in Zoom. You push the button and it cuts you off mid-sentence, so I apologize for that. But we're going to move into our second presentation for today. This is a presentation facilitated by Jerlene Mosley from the Gallup organization, and Jerlene's going to talk about the power of hope and inspiration in our schools. So after having sort of steeped ourselves a little bit in some of the stress and some of the causes and challenges with stress, we're gonna shift a little bit and talk about hope in our school. So we're delighted about that. We also have Jerlene Mosley with us live here today. And so afterward, I'm gonna have a moment just to be able to ask her a question or two with her here live in the session. So we'll go straight away to the presentation by Jerlene Mosley from the Gallup organization.
Greetings, everyone. It's my pleasure and privilege to join you today. My name is Jerlene Mosley, and I come to you from the Gallup organization. We study analytics and advice, and I am especially pleased and excited to share with you some of our strategies to continually support you in the amazing work that you are doing. To help students land in their best life at school involves a lot of verbs and adjectives this year, especially this year in this age of COVID in 2020. And so I'm glad that we have some time devoted to figuring out more about that, because I think there are some great strategies and actions already within you. And so I want to share those with you today. You see my strengths on that screen. One of the assessments that Gallup has that 23 million people have taken part in, and maybe you too, is that of the Clifton Strengths Finder, illuminating what each of us has inside of us to do good out in the world. And so especially today, I'll be tapping into my individualization and activator. I want you to have some ideas and strategies that work for you immediately in your own situation, on your campus, with your team, and all of that. So let's get about it. Many of you may have taken part in our learning earlier this year around followers' needs, okay? As a leader, you have followers, different kinds of followers, your staff, your students, your family, your community. And so what we have studied and know is that followers need this from their leaders, okay? Trust, compassion, stability, and hope. We are going to center our energy today on hope, okay? All of our work, all of our research, our positive psychology emphasis is really built on a foundation of studying what's possible within us, okay? What's right about us. I think you have learned more about that. You've flexed your talent muscles in new and different ways in these times. And so sometimes what's so instinctive and immediate within us might also be what we take for granted. So let's illuminate that. And we are going to shine the spotlight today on hope, okay? It is a follower's need. It is something that unifies us. It pulls us forward. As we think about what hope is, it's both a noun and a verb. It is that belief that the future will be better than the present and the ability to make it so. And one of the things we know is that the intention about hope matters a lot, okay? One of our partners is Barbara Fredrickson out of the University of Michigan. And you may have been familiar with her research about broaden and build. And she really talks about the fact that, hope comes into its own in crisis. We haven't really had a lot of time to reflect on this, to illuminate this, but I know, leaders, that you have been forced to do some things in new and immediate ways. I think you've tapped into the most creative, innovative pathways in yourself and in your partners to rally and manifest and make real solutions that students and their families needed. And so as we kind of camp on this idea about hope, it is two parts. It's not only the belief that the future will be better, but the power to make it so. And I want you to know more about what you've probably done already, but maybe we can make even more intentional, okay, as you support your educators. What do we mean by hope? Well, it happens according to another acronym that has to do with GPA, and that is goals and agency and pathways, okay? We've always had goals. I think you've had some goals now on your calendar, in your Outlook, on your Teams, in your phone, on the back of your door in your office, on a Post-it on your laptop, on a notepad in your car, so many places where you have short-term and long-term goals. Some that we never imagined would be a goal until this calendar year. But when we think about hope, it always includes that we are building towards goals, what's about to happen, what do we wish and hope for the future, okay? Now, the way that we move towards those goals, we can refer to as our agency or our energy. And that's really about, hey, how do we get from here to there? Okay, I bet already today, leaders, before you're even on this webcast, you have figured out a lot of moments. You've had obviously a lot of moments. You have 20,000 moments in a day. So even if it's mid-morning, it explains why we're tired on some days that end in Y. And so there are so many moments that you have figured out how we do something. I think in many of these moments in this school year, you may have wanted more time than you had to strategize, scrutinize, all of that. But it has resulted in outcomes, better outcomes, okay, new outcomes. And so that also involves pathways, that there are these multiple routes to a goal. Your talent is part of your pathways, the instinctive way. Your talent is your speed. Some of you are wired up with a sense of competition. And so I bet you've used that not only to think about wins for your school, for your staff, for individuals. Maybe in the past 24 hours, you've had a conversation with a new teacher and it involved a win for them. And so as we think about these pathways, it involves not only our unique wiring one by one by one, but how do we keep equipping our staff and our students with their problem solving potential, okay? And so as we think about this and as we go forward in the slides and not backwards, let's unpack these a little bit more, okay? Some of this is about goals, obviously, but it's also about re-goaling. What we know about hope and as we support our colleagues is that I'm not sure we ever acknowledge enough about re-goaling. Okay. I think each and every one of us have gotten to this place in our leader life, and there have been some bumps in the road, and we re-goaled about that. I don't know that we ever talk about that enough. We've had so many opportunities in this school year. And as we think about sacrifices and rewards, I think it's also good for us to illuminate some of the re-goaling that we've done. I think that models for kids about how we re-goal. What is possible now? We acknowledge that things have changed, that we might be doing school in a new way. I know even in my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska here, we might be doing school in a new way following Thanksgiving than we have before Thanksgiving. And so part of a hope strategy is also about acknowledging that change, accepting it, acknowledging that to your followers, and helping articulate what's possible now. Now, with agency and energy, it so matters, leaders, and you know this, those check-ins that you do with your staff, they matter. I think one of the things I want to do today is help you know that all the ways that you have texted or called or had a quick email or a phone call at all hours of the day and night, I know that. But all of the ways that you have personally checked in with your colleagues matters. Our engagement research would back that up. So thank you. It might only take 120 seconds. And yet, if I'm a new teacher of yours and you have called me as I'm driving to my school just to say, hey, how are you? How are you doing? What can I help you with today? I heard this about you from one of your parents. That matters so much. It is pouring into me, and that matters for now and future. One of the things that Shane Lopez writes about in his book called Making Hope Happen, and I've got a picture of that book for you. It's just a great resource. But one of the things he talks about in that book is preserving and recruiting extra agency. And we can do that from leaning into the most hopeful people around us. Okay. Who's the most hopeful person on your campus? That could be a student, a staff member, a parent volunteer. You'll know who that individual is. But the more we can talk about those individuals, share their names, there is a good kind of contagion about that. How do we multiply that? I think it's important, leaders, that you have time with your most hopeful colleagues. Okay. The hope that you give to your staff, they give to students. Students take hope home. Whatever their living situation is, whatever group of grown-ups surrounds them, the hope that we give them also carries there, and it can bolster kids from unfortunate outcomes and negative news and outcomes. So I like the words preserve and recruit, extra agency, extra hopefulness. Who is your phone a friend, principals, that you just need to have a few minutes with? Our engagement work for years has highlighted that having a best friend at work is important to how we thrive and be our best. And I know that that could be another administrator in your life. It could be the previous administrator of the school where you are now leading. But think about, leaders, who is your phone a friend? And make sure that you have time with them. Okay. I bet you've already leaned into them, but continue to do that. Okay. It might be a neighbor that is available in your backyard for a glass of wine or a quick walk around the circle, whoever that individual is. It's important, leaders, that you get time with them to invest in yourself so that you can share your hope with others. Okay. As we think about ideas, okay, these pathways about that, you know, one of the things we know from our followers needs research, and I shared a little bit about this earlier this spring as we were fortunate enough to have time with you. Make sure you highlight for your followers what has stayed the same. Okay. You are still helping students land in your best life. You are still helping families realize this as part of their everyday. And so, I know there's a lot of things that have changed, and because so much of this is about the and also make sure that we highlight, write about, share about, ask about what is still the same. Okay. You have new teachers that have dreamt their whole life of having their own classroom, and they get to this fall. So, how are we still celebrating that? That leads us into joy. What are micro moments of joy that are happening around you? Take a deep breath, leaders. Go ahead and take that moment to exhale and inhale, and think about a micro moment of joy that you have had in the last 24 hours. I think nature can give us a lot of those. I sure was more in tune with the hummingbirds that I had visit my backyard than I ever have been before. We got a little icing up of our trees earlier this week in Omaha. And what was beautiful about that the next day is that as it melted, it kind of looked like rain, but it was just a beautiful visual. Maybe it's the sound of kids laughing. You have some of that on a Zoom call or in your very own classrooms. I do wonder if we might just pipe in baby laughter to other places that we are. I was on a crowded rental car van a few years ago where a lot of humans were tired and maybe not portraying their best selves. And a little kiddo laughed and it elevated everybody's mood. So from that time on, I just think we could pipe in baby laughter into tricky meetings or, high anxiety times. And I think that could help us. But I think that's related to leaders. What is a micro moment of joy? They happen around us every day. You are creating those for kids. And so take a moment and share those. There's a good, hopeful ripple about that. And that goes into thinking about how each of the humans that are lucky enough to work with you at your school, how are they contributing? What's in your thought bubbles that you could help this custodian know, or this lunchroom supervisor know, or your assistant, or this rock star veteran teacher that happened to come along in this campus that you inherited, and you watch still that he is just this anchor that people feel calm around. And you just know that wherever he is, kids and other staff will feel better. And maybe your thought bubbles are thankful for him, but have you let that person know? Okay. Mission and purpose is still huge and amazing, and the reason that we get to do this work. And so, how do we instill that and keep that going? Hope really is about having a direction and a future that we can be inspired about. Okay. How do we keep our eyes, our lens, our hearts focused on that as you lead with intention? Okay. It's more than responding. I know we have to respond to a lot. And leaders, please think about what you're intentional about. Okay. Because if I'm one of your followers, that keeps me focused on the future. The more you're hopeful about the future, the more engaged I am as one of your followers, whether I'm a parent or a community member or an 11th grader or one of your staff members. And so hope also comes with being intentional, okay? Not just responding, but also being intentional. And here's where gratitude plays a role, and how talking about how joyful that is, gratitude that makes us joyful. Thank yous go a long way, don't they? I'm guessing that each and every one of us has a place, a bulletin board, a drawer, a folder, a little box of where we have kept notes to us. Thank you notes, fan club notes, I like to call them. And so, all the ways that we encourage that, I do want to give you a few moments to just think and then write a quick note or a text right now to someone in your school or on your team that you're so grateful for. Okay. I'll give you about a minute to do that. Think about the behavior, the attitude, the moment that you wish you could multiply and why you're grateful. It goes such a long way. This is such a simple, elegant strategy we can use. And yet sometimes I think we have good intentions about it that zoom right past being able to do it. So I'll give you a few more seconds here just to type that text, to maybe do that email, or write on a sticky note what you'll write in a card and put it in the mail. I've tried to be more intentional about this myself this year. I thought it could achieve two outcomes. Number one, supporting the US Postal Service. And number two, even more importantly, making someone in my world know that I'm grateful they're in my world and that the world is better because of them. So go ahead and take another moment to make that real for someone to send that text, to send that email, to write that note. What we get to do, leaders, is create hope through meaningful conversations. Okay. Here are some of my favorite questions, and feel free to utilize these in the future. What gives you hope right now? What are you unsure about in the future regarding our work, and how can I help you feel more confident about it? Part about supporting these humans with whom we partner is moving obstacles out of the way. That's part of a hope strategy. It really is. I think another great thing to remind people of is how you're grateful for one of their strengths. What is something that they do so instinctively that they can't help but do? Maybe you just are, maybe the person you wrote your thank you to is just such a compassionate listener. You appreciate how they do that with eighth graders, and you're grateful for how you see them do it with other human beings as well. And always, leaders, we can never go wrong by reminding people how we are helping pour into the future. Okay. However many kiddos go to your school, whatever number that is, 750, 400, you might also be in a role where you're thinking about thousands. They all have a name and they all have a future. And the opportunity to contribute and influence that is really amazing and really something to be proud about as you put your head on your pillow at night. I borrowed this slide from another deck about thinking about teams, and I realized that it was a pre-COVID slide. But I do really like thinking about the fact that we are made for collaborating. We like music. We like to eat together. We laugh together. And so as you think about those three likes, I bet you've incorporated those into some of your staff and team meetings. I think about how the hope building on your team has allowed us to really work on behalf of each other. I know one of my good friends who's a teacher here in one of the Omaha districts, they've really had to cover for each other, literally, as people are out for quarantine. And she would say that the 5 of them on their team, they were great friends already. They've become even better friends, and they've leaned into each other to help them really help kids. And I think it's also modeled for students about how we are built for collaborating. I'm going to offer you up a couple questions that we might visit in our breakout sessions here soon, but there's some of my favorites. At Gallup, I think we do 2 things. I think we ask and we listen. So we love questions, and I love thinking about ones that are relevant and remarkable and usable and good for y'all to use. So here's one of my favorites. What is something that always works with your staff to keep them hopeful and inspired? Okay. If you could share that with other people in your group, I think we'd probably really, unearth some great ideas that you each just do. You know it, you have instigated it. And yet when we share that, it puts it out in the universe for us to know more about. So that might be a question you use. I've seen principals use this with their staff to ask each teacher, hey, what's something you do that always works with your kids? Just always works. It's a Zoom strategy that you found really helpful, or an in-person strategy that you found really helpful. So ask people what they do that's just a guaranteed winner in their toolkit. I don't know that we always know that about everybody. The other things that I might have you share, and we'll let Jim guide us about which ones we'll be using here shortly. But other prompts that I really like having you reflect on and share is, this is my current trifecta of the way that I start meetings now. Okay. Share one thing you're grateful for, one thing you're doing better than before. What have you gotten really good at, better at in the last few months? And then describe for us a person or event that keeps you inspired in doing this work. So borrow those questions for the future, and I think we might have a chance to share about those coming up. And here are some other resources that I will share the links to about hope. Okay. The strategy is about that. It matters. It's a choice. We can learn it. I think you can either lead out of hope or you can lead out of fear. And fear is real. And hope also isn't, just meaning that you type an email that's full of smiley faces and exclamation points. It's not that. It's really that we are acknowledging about how that the future will be better than the present, and that every one of my followers has a role in making it so, and that we can commit to together how we're going to make the future better. So there's just a lot of reality about it. And I think that these strategies, and we'll share some, this book is also one of my favorite on my bookshelf as well. So thank you, leaders. I will give it back to Dr. McIntyre now. And I just want to say thank you again for all the ways that you help our world be better, leaders. Helping students to land in their best life has a bigger, bolder font in this calendar year of 2020, and likely in some of 2021 as well. And so thank you for all the ways you lend your talents towards that.
Okay, very good. Well, we thank Jolene Mosley for being with us today and for her presentation, and we're delighted that she's live with us today. And so, Jolene, before we go into our small group conversation, maybe I thought you could kick us off a little bit. And just a question I had is, you spoke really eloquently in your presentation about the power of inspiration. And I wonder, what else can principals do to inspire their teachers and inspire their staff at this really challenging time?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody. I think it's really leaders just leaning into what you do best naturally, okay? You be you, okay? Think about what people thank you for. Think about the qualities that people list about you, okay? How are you known? What do people write about when they say their gratitude? And think about being more intentional about that, okay? I think each of us has some pretty immediate instinctive pathways we can use to pull people towards the future. If you're a world thinker, if you love to think big about things, share your perspective about how our actions matter about that. Maybe you're compassionate listening. Your staff really well. That matters to you to go deep with people. Well, it's easy for you to point out their successes. If you're an includer, it's just natural for how you might pair up new teachers with veterans and how you can pretty easily match up phone a friends. You can match up partnerships about that. Or maybe if one of your, leading edge, one of your superpowers is being goal oriented, you easily can see the steps of progress that we can follow. So I would just say lean into who you are. Don't try to be like others. You be you, okay? Lean into what you do naturally and do that more intentionally.
I love it. Thank you. That sounds like a strengths-based approach, Jolene. So we would expect nothing less from the Gallup organization. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us
You're
today.
welcome.
Thank you for the presentation. And we're going to move into some small group conversation here. And just as a reminder, here are the questions that some of the questions. We will only have about 10 minutes, so hopefully we'll get to some of this. But Jolene asked in the presentation, what always works with your staff to keep them hopeful and inspired? How are you sowing the seeds of hope in your school? And then to think about also, this notion of stability. What are some of the things that are the same in your school? What great work is still happening in your school despite all the changes and all the context being different? Is there anything that your school is actually doing better now than before the pandemic? I'm sure that there is. How can we think about that, and how might that inspire hope in your teachers? And then how to build on the existing strengths, as Jolene was just talking about, of you and your staff to support the school's mission. And then how can you encourage and amplify those micro moments of joy in your school? So we're going to go back to small group. We'll have about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together at the end to wrap up and debrief and share any of the conversation from your small group conversation. So you'll get an invitation right now to small groups, and please accept that invitation, and we'll bring you to the small group conversation. Okay, y'all, welcome back from your small group conversation. And we've just got a couple of minutes left to wrap up, and I'll share my screen and just so you see what is on our to-do list in the last couple of minutes. And I am going to put into the chat right now a link to the survey for this session, and that we really appreciate you taking that. It gives us great feedback, and also it allows us to know you are here, and for the Tennessee Department of Education to award your tassel credit. So please take a second and just grab that out of the chat right now. Make sure you have it pasted into a browser, and so you can take that survey for us. But before we go, I would love to just hear any thoughts, ideas, insights from the small group conversation that anyone would like to share out. You can just turn on your video and your microphone and share out. In particular, I'd love to hear about how you might apply what you've learned today. So what action or actions might you consider in your school based on the conversation and the session today? And so just love to hear from you. So I'd also invite any of the facilitators, any of the things that you might have heard in the small group that might be worth sharing. And again, for our participants, any ideas around focusing on action items moving forward?
This is Rob Taylor from Houston High School in Germantown. It makes you think. I appreciate the time that the presenters put into it. It makes you think, am I doing enough? So it just makes me think about, I want to go out and see the teachers more now, more than before. So that's just something, just a quick thought.
Yeah, Rob, I appreciate that. And I know you are. I mean, you're doing so much, and there's so many competing demands, but I really love that question. How am I sowing seeds of hope in my school? Because I think that's just a great reminder, a question to keep in the back of our head as we go through our day and do this really important work that y'all do, is how do I continue to make sure that our teachers, our staff, our kids, our families all have hope, and that we do too. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Other thoughts, takeaways, comments before we wrap up?
Jim, one of the things that I pulled together from both yesterday and today is that the conversations that people are having are much more intentional and much more, I don't say focused, but they're attentive to listening in a deeper level. Because sometimes we take those quick conversations in the hallway, and we're not as attuned to them as we probably should be. But now, because of the limitations of what we have to really pay attention and listen. And like everybody said, I'm having those conversations with my teachers, and I think that's important. We have to listen. And I hear that more and more, as many of them are just saying, I'm listening, and I'm trying to do this and accommodate this because our time is limited. We have.
Absolutely. And I think we hear that we hear our principals doing that extraordinarily well, and appreciate that aspect of their leadership. I'm hopeful. I heard, one of the conversations I heard this morning was how we're sort of all in this together, and we're working through it and working through all the challenges. And one of the things I heard yesterday is, when we look back and think, we've actually made a lot of progress. There's still huge challenges and lots of issues to overcome, but we've moved from trying to survive to thinking about how we and our kids thrive. And I love that sentiment, and I love the hopefulness of it. And so I really appreciate all that y'all do for children every single day. Any other thoughts or takeaways from the small group conversation?
I know I'm going to keep the reminder and put this quote or this question in front of me daily, and that is, how are you sowing seeds of hope in your school? Just as a reminder every day, what am I doing to ensure that happens? Absolutely. Elizabeth, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think sometimes we, as has been said, we don't always need to necessarily know the answers, but it's good to live with the questions. And that's a great question to live with and to be thinking about all the time. Tara Howell-Spikes, you had something about a survey to see how teachers are doing. You want to tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Well, maybe the young lady that that shared it in my group can do a better job than I can. I thought it was a wonderful idea, so that's why I shared it with the group. I think her name was Robin, maybe. Sorry, Robin. I thought it was a great idea.
So the idea was a weekly survey just to see how teachers are doing, not unlike our pulse check at the beginning, right? So say, hey, where are you at today? How are you feeling today? Let's get some information and figure out how we as leaders can support them.
So
Fabulous.
eloquently said. Great job. That's
There
exactly
she
what
is.
said.
There's Robin.
Okay, Robin.
I had switched over to another screen because a parent called and I couldn't find where the Zoom was at the bottom. I kept hearing her, so I'm so sorry.
It's a modern occupational hazard.
Sorry, but anyway, what I do is I send a survey out every Monday to the faculty. I send it along with my weekly bulletin, and it's just something simple. It usually has 2 questions on it. Sometimes I'll add something funny in there, and then other times I'll just add, what's on your mind this week? What can I do to help you this week? And how are you feeling? It's just usually 3 short, simple things. And during the week, that way me and my assistant principal can make it more intentional about how we do support the teachers. So if one teacher is, struggling with making phone calls to parents or struggling with not having student work in, I can jump in and help make some of those calls. Or if they are struggling with copies or they can't get in touch with parents, I'll do home visits. Or maybe they are having a great day and they have something they want to show me. I'll go down and look at it and then share it with the rest of the faculty in the bulletin. It just helps us have a little bit more individuality and differentiation with our teachers to know what's going on so that we can support them personally rather than it being just as a whole group. And then on Wednesdays, we try to always do something special for our teachers. Like tomorrow we're doing this thing called You've Been Gobbled. It's a kind of like a Thanksgiving little paper it's called You've Been Gobbled. It's a note. Just read this note. We hope it makes you smile. And it just kind of tells them what we're thankful for them. And then we add a few more notes in there that they can give to other teachers that say that you've been gobbled so that they can spread what they're thankful for. And in the survey, I do put the last question is, who are you? Who has helped you this week and you want to thank? And in my bulletin, they always put somebody. It kind of gives them a shout out. And I put it in the bulletin and they tell me they can't wait to scroll down to the bottom of the bulletin and read if who the shout outs are to. So they have a way to make others know who they're thankful for. And it kind of gives people a great one to know that people are thanking them for what they're doing.
That's awesome. Robin, what a great example of all of the things we've talked about. Thinking about addressing teacher stress, thinking about gratitude, thinking about creating hope and support for our teachers. So thank you for sharing that example. We're going to have to wrap up. I put a survey link in the chat. If you don't mind to please take that right now. That's how we know that you are here and how the Department of Education can assign an award your tassel credit. So please do that right now. I want to just wrap up by thanking Tennessee Department of Education, Tennessee SCORE, the American Institutes for Research, Matt Clifford, the Gallup Organization, and Jerlene Mosley. Thank you. Our facilitators, and of course, all of you for your engagement today in the great conversation. But of course, as always, I want to make sure I thank you for just the incredible work that you're doing for children amidst the really challenging circumstances that we currently face at the moment. And so just really appreciate your leadership and thank you and hope you have a great day. I hope you join us for the week after Thanksgiving for the next module of the Principal Professional Learning Series. Thank you all. Have a great day.